I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle Now. Bill, well, there's more bad news out of Washington, D.C., where the city is torn apart by partisan division and, of course, President Trump dragging the country into another record month of job growth. It turns out that Moody's Analytics and I want to get the proper title. ADP Moody Analytics has done a survey of new jobs created, and while economists had expected some 178,000 jobs to be created in January, in fact, some 213,000 jobs were created, and this was across all sectors, small, medium, and large businesses, and a variety of different kinds of industries, including the service sector, healthcare, education, just kind of a broad-based growth. Now, Bill, this, of course, poses a problem for a certain group of people in Washington, D.C.
I bet it does.
Let me just start off with your instinctive reaction to more news that, of course, economists were surprised and the Trump economy continues to grow.
Unexpectedly. Remember the 8 years of pathetic, anemic growth, and numbers are weaker than usual, and the economy is growing slower than usual. Unexpectedly, remember those 8 years? You know, the interesting thing about things like this, Scott, is that it's certainly presenting data points. We don't know if it's a correlation or a causality. And I say we determine to find out. I say we close the government down for a year. And we can then chart the economic growth of what the economy is doing while the government is functioning at full force. And then maybe after 6 months, maybe we'll shut the government down 50%, and we'll see if the numbers go up or down from that point. But I have a theory about this. The fundamental problem with the government growth, because I'm not surprised about the job numbers, and I won't talk all about the government, but basically, a dollar that comes into somebody's hands, you can either pay an employee or you can pay the government half of it, whatever the number is. And it is beyond these people's comprehension to understand that if I pay an employee directly, that's better than me sending my 50 cents to Washington, where they take 35, 40 cents, then send it downstream to somebody who takes another 5, and then hands maybe 5 or 6 cents to the employee. They can't understand this because they think that their job is to provide jobs. Their job is not to provide jobs. And here's where I'm going with this. If we have enough of these government shutdowns, we talked about this a little bit on Right Angle, and this becomes the new normal, this is a real problem for the government, because if people notice that the things are working pretty much as well as they did before the government shutdown as after, they might start asking some questions on what all of their money is buying.
Well, and that's the CNBC story I read, Bill, exactly pointed out what you're saying here. Despite the fact that the government was shut down for about a month, the economy grew. People continued to add jobs. Apparently confidence in the business sector was still high enough to inspire people to continue to hire. And yet we heard this week a report from the Congressional Budget Office saying that some $11 billion was lost during the course of the government shutdown, $3 billion of that being productivity of government workers. That's, as Larry Kudlow at the White House pointed out, that's a relative drop in the bucket. Bill, we're going into the heated announcement season for the 2020 presidential run right now.
God almighty, is there no mercy, Scott?
Is there any chance that anybody can stand up against what appears to be an economic juggernaut?
Well, this is all going to depend on whether Donald Trump is savvy enough to use his economic numbers in a way beyond just tweeting them out triumphantly, which I would do, by the way. I have no problem with that. In fact, I'm always happy to see these kind of triumphant tweets about how things are growing despite the proclamations to doom. But if the question's about 2020, this has to be not just a series of statements, it has to be a campaign. And my hope is that Donald Trump either understands or is ready to hire people who understand the moral aspect of this. Because the Democrats do nothing but run on supposed moral superiority. And since we don't counter that charge, most people agree with it. Romney was a classic example. People exit voting. Romney's better on the economy, better on defense, better on terrorism, better on everything, except for who do you think cares more about you? So if Trump is smart, what he'll do is he will use these economic numbers and he will use the visuals, the optics, will be record black employment, record Hispanic employment, record. And he should be in those communities shaking hands with people that have jobs after having been on the dole for their lives, which is not their fault. You know, after 3 generations of the school system producing nothing of any value whatsoever, near as I can see. It's not a surprise that after 3 generations, people who are raised on welfare remain on welfare anywhere in the country. It's not a surprise at all. So Donald Trump can, if he can, and he will be able to, he'll find himself tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people whose lives used to be one of dependency and despair, and now are one of hope and optimism, because he got the government off our back enough to let the natural growth and the natural prosperity of this country flower.
Well, I can see the argument from the Democrat side that's going to say a couple of things. Number one, this is the Obama era policies coming to fruition,
of
and
course,
more people have health care now, and
yeah.
more people are secure in their jobs because of essentially the Obama, 2011 recovery summer.
And 12.
Yes, that
and
statement that this is just the
and
coming
10.
to fruition of the Obama legacy. But the other thing they're going to say is certainly a country that is as well off as us could be spending more money for the kinds of programs that people in desperate need necessitate. And also, they'll come at businesses and say, hey, you fat cats that are making record profits and doing all this hiring, it's about time you had a much better green legacy and started investing much more by government force into the things that make for a cleaner environment, and a planet that doesn't boil.
In other words, record numbers of people lifted out of poverty, increasing wealth all across the nation. Nancy Pelosi hardest hit. Yes, that's exactly right. They're going to have to do something to move the spotlight off of this. But I want to talk about this idea that we've got all this money. Scott, what's the richest country in the world?
My assumption would be this country.
Okay, so if I asked you how much, if I asked a businessman or anybody who's responsible, don't have to be a businessman. If I asked somebody to tell me what they're worth, what would they do? Wouldn't they list their assets in one column and their liabilities in another?
And subtract.
Correct. So when we're $25 trillion down, we're the poorest country in the world. We are the poorest country in the world. We have the largest debt by orders of magnitude. Orders of magnitude, $25 trillion. That's just the bank money that's missing.
And that's whole dollars, Bill, though. As a percentage of GDP, I don't know that we're the top one on the list.
Well, I'd be willing to bet you we are, Scott, because I don't think if you took all of the debt in the world and put it together, you'd come up with a number even close to 25 trillion, let alone 200 trillion. And I'm saying this for a fact. Okay, this idea that we've got all this money, we're the richest country in the world, is just not true. We're the poorest country in the world. We owe more money than we probably owe more money than there is in the world. So we got to understand that this is not something that can continue forever. And this idea that we just have a giant pot of money that can be printed forever and ever and ever is not, pardon the expression, it's not sustainable. So just put that aside for a minute. Yes, if the economic numbers are good, then they will do anything they can to point out how these draconian tax cuts have hurt poor people. And if Donald Trump didn't have some sense of the political theater, he wouldn't be president now. He has to come back with those arguments. Not make them, show them. Show them. Show people whose lives used to be miserable. Show us some videos of what life was like before you got your job or before you got your raise or before any of this stuff started happening. And now show us pictures. Those kind of ads are irrefutable. And it's not a one-off either. It's not like, hey, we managed to find somebody. You know, if you want to play the morality card, the moral superiority card, which is all the progressives have because their record is appalling. And it's appalling morally too, but that's a different issue. If all you're going to do on the opposition is play the morality card, you have to be prepared to not only defend yourself against that strategy, but you have to be prepared to go on the counterattack and destroy it at its root. And what I mean by this, the clearest example I've ever seen of this in my entire life was in the 2016 campaign, where Hillary Clinton was going to get every single woman's vote because of the Republican war on women. And Hillary Clinton's entire campaign was going to be based on what a troglodyte Donald Trump is, and all of these men. She's just going to play these cards to the end of time, Scott. And that didn't happen. And you know why? Do you remember why? Why this?
There was
this her main strategy.
Little tussle at a debate, or a little fuss at a debate.
Yes, Donald Trump had the political genius to take away Hillary Clinton's most potent weapon by a wide margin, because Hillary's most potent weapon is not her personality or her charm. Okay, the whole Clinton thing, the whole idea at the at the end of election night when the glass ceiling comes shattering down, this whole thing is predicated on Hillary Clinton saying that I'm good for women and the Republicans have a war on women. And Donald Trump had the brilliance to take, what was it, 5 of Bill Clinton's accusers, molestation victims in some cases, actual rape victims in another, and put them in the front row of what I think was the second debate. And what he basically did there was he said, Hillary, I dare you to come out here and talk about what a champion of women you are. You're the person who destroyed these people.
So, Bill, let's look at the Republicans' platform going into the 2020 election, not just at the presidency, but at all levels. Now, with more jobs, more prosperity, that means more tax revenues coming into federal coffers. Do you see any possibility that the Republican Party is going to regain the mantle of fiscal responsibility and start actually invoking or implementing budget cuts and really taking a look at long-term entitlement funding?
You know, the reason when you really get down to the paucity of the arguments on the left and what they bring to the table, the only reason that this is even close is because we are incapable of selling, freedom and stuff. We just can't do it. So if I was put in charge of Republican messaging, and more specifically to your question, in charge of what the political Republican position should be across the board, I would basically say, listen, we have this enormous debt, and there are 2 ways that we can pay off this debt. And if we don't pay off the debt, bad things are going to happen. And I would explain what those bad things are. But there really are 2 ways to pay this debt off. And one of them is excruciatingly painful and long, and the other one is relatively painless and longer. I would say, if it were me, I would say, listen, we do not have to cut spending in order to get ourselves out of this debt. We have to hold spending. And that's an entirely different thing. We just have to hold it. When I say hold it, I don't mean hold the rate of increase, because that's what they consider. When you say, oh, they cut money from the school system, they didn't cut money from the school system. They gave the school system less of an increase than they were going to give them, but it's increasing every year. I'd cut that nonsense out. I would basically say, listen, this is our budget. Here we are. We're not going to make any more cuts, but this is what we're going to spend. We're going to spend $3.6 trillion a year from now on for a while. And we're going to lower the tax rate, and we're going to take this economic growth, and we're going to grow our way out of this. Just to give you a rough idea of numbers, the federal budget in 1863, in the middle of the Civil War, was $550 million. It's $500 million. The budget in 2018 or so is probably 3.5 trillion, round numbers, right? So we go from $500 million in 1863 to $3,500 billion in 2017-18. And the reason that we could pay that much more money is because there's just so much more wealth being generated. If we were to say, I like this number because it's got a nice biblical ring to it, because this is an undertaking of biblical proportions. But if somebody had actual courage, they would explain to the American people what the problem is and how it is not going to go away no matter how much we want to. And then I would say, we are now, as a nation, going to go for a walk in the desert for 40 years. It's not going to be a starvation walk. And it's not going to be a walk without luxury and fun. It's not going to be any of those things. You will be able to make as much money as you want to. As a matter of fact, the more money you make, the faster this walk through the desert is going to go. All I'm saying is we're going to hold this line at this spending number. And as the economy gets bigger and bigger and bigger, that deficit begins to shrink in terms of total value. I mean, obviously, if you look at the Civil War number I gave you, if they had a $550 million budget and they had a 100% deficit, a $550 million deficit, we spend that in about 4 hours, right? I mean, we spend about $10 billion a day. So obviously the economy is much bigger than it was in 1863, and obviously what used to be an adobe, hut in Los Angeles with a hitching post is significantly more sophisticated than that now. But I think that's about the only way you could really solve this problem, is say to Americans, listen, we're not saying that you have to stay at this income for the next 40 years. We're not saying that at all. We're saying the government has to stay at this income for the next 40 years. That's what I would do.
Ladies and gentlemen, through good times and through Obama times, Bill Whittle has been here and analyzing the news, and we do that now with Bill Whittle Now 5 times every week, so you get his take on the breaking news of the day based on the principles that have carried him and you thus far. We appreciate the members at BillWhittle.com who've made this possible. They've joined up. They actually went to BillWhittle.com and clicked that Become a Member link and signed up. A lot of people also, by the way, at YouTube go and click the little notification link so that they can find out when we post a new video. There's also like a subscribe button on YouTube too that you can click that will make you part of the team even if you're not fully engaged financially in it. We welcome whatever level your engagement is, whatever you're comfortable with right now, and we'd like to do the best we can to make this so good that you want to move to the next level and eventually become a producing member at BillWhittle.com. Well, it's the members who made it possible, and so we thank them. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Have a great day.